Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm very excited about this evening and all of us coming together. I'm sorry that we had to move this event to virtual, but I'm also happy about it because as a result, we have 166 people signed up, and I see they're still joining us. I also want to promise that we will run a live meeting. As I had promised a lot of people, we were going to have great food. And since we canceled the meeting, we will still be able to come back together and have a networking meeting when the weather gets better. So stay tuned for that. On the next slide is just me. I'm Gina Wurtenberg, the Associate Professor of Professional Practice and the Executive Director of the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation. On the next slide, you see our agenda for this evening. I'm going to make some opening remarks to set the context, and then Jim King, Senior Director of the Office for Career Management at Rutgers Business School, is going to talk a little bit about what he does and careers. We are delighted to have our keynote speaker, Govi Rao, who I have known and had the privilege of working with in various capacities for more than 20 years, who is the CEO of Phase Change Solutions. Then we're also thrilled to have Dr. Alexander Gates, he goes by Alec, who is a distinguished service professor in Newark School of Arts and Sciences, and he's a professor and an author. You're going to hear more about his book, and he'll be telling us some really important information from that. At 7 o'clock, we're going to have a panel discussion. Our moderator, Erin Byrne, who has joined us. She's the Distinguished Executive in Residence from the RICSI, the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation. We have 5 fabulous panelists. And Sam Couchy, the CEO and founder of One Huddle that I've had a chance to work with. Rebecca Lubat, CEO and founder of Lubat Strategies. Ben Glowacki, a sustainability strategy and market insights leader at BASF Corporation, one of the very most sustainable companies. Francine Chu, the head of corporate impact at Guardian Life Insurance, and Mark Malik, the chief investment officer at Muriel Siebert and Company. We're also going to have a raffle of 3 of Alec Gates' books. And I'm going to move the chat over so that it doesn't block me. And we have a post-event survey that I'm going to ask you to fill out at the end of the evening. So I also want to give a shout out to our small but mighty team. In addition to Erin, we have John Sarno, Esquire, who came up with this idea pre-election around 6 months ago, and he's joined us. We have Deb Flamengo, our amazing project coordinator and the glue that holds us together. And we have Dan Grimm, who you met a little bit a while ago, also a distinguished executive in residence who helps with our communications. And I mentioned Erin. So we have quite an agenda. On the next slide, what you see is the diversity, and I'm allowed to use that word, the diversity of our attendees. We have 166 people who signed up, and I see people are still joining us. And the people come from every walk of life in terms of businesses, nonprofits, government, quite a few Rutgers Business School students, faculty, other faculty, companies such as Johnson & Johnson, KPMG, Kenvue, et cetera, Goldman Sachs. So we have quite a good group of people, diverse group of people. And on the next slide, what you see is who is and what do we mean by corporate social innovation, CSI? You might have heard of CSR, corporate social responsibility. That is one element of CSI. But when we think of CSI and corporate social innovation, what we're talking about today is we believe that a more systemic approach, a holistic approach, to the way we see business contributing to societal needs. And we think that today's societal needs clearly are profound, and that more than ever, business has the opportunity and the means to help to address this potential to do well in business, as well as help to serve and solve some of our most profound societal issues. The model has 4 pillars, as you can see here: giving back to society, which is really focused on strategic philanthropy, as well as corporate volunteering. There's a tremendous opportunity to engage employees in contributions, and corporate social responsibility. In the second pillar, aligning profit and purpose, this is where we have shared value, creating shared value. So it's not just an either or that is good for business or good for society. It's about both and. And we have purpose-driven leadership plays an incredibly important role here, and B Corps, B corporations. The third pillar at the bottom is engaging in responsible business practices. And here is where we have ESG, which I'm going to talk about more in a minute, as well as paying a living wage. We talk about shared prosperity, stakeholder capitalism, and DEI. And our fourth pillar, which we were just talking about in our informal conversation, is advocating. Advocacy for social issues is going to be incredibly important. And we're going to be talking about this more on the panel on public policy and the role of advocacy, activism in corporations, and public policy and what's happening right now. So on the next slide, many of you know what ESG is, but some of you may not be as familiar with the term. So what is ESG? And when we talk about ESG, we're talking about managing both the inside out, i.e., what is the company doing to affect in a positive or negative way the environment, as well as the outside in risks and opportunities, which is what is the environment doing to affect the company. And ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, 3 components. And when we talk about the environment, we're talking about, again, how the company impacts the environment, as well as how the environment impacts the company. And what can we do to proactively reduce negative impacts and also leverage positive opportunities? And that's really important. In the social area, how does the company manage its relationships with all its stakeholders? And that includes the employees, are very important: people, planet, and profits. The suppliers, the communities, as Linda was talking about, the local community. And finally, governance, which is all the practices that the company does to manage and govern itself, to make good decisions, to be in compliance with the law, but to meet the needs of all its stakeholders. So on the next slide, what you see is how ESG has evolved over the years. I'm not going to go through all of this, but what you can see is it's been around a very long time. This is not something that has just started. And many times ESG has been used interchangeably with the term sustainability or corporate responsibility. And each company really sets its own priorities and strategies. But it includes all of these different environmental, social, and governance topics that you see here. On the environmental side, in terms of energy efficiency, pollution reduction, biodiversity is incredibly important. And on the social, we're talking about the people, the human capital, all of the aspects we're talking about right now about labor relations, diversity agenda. So it's quite broad. And human rights and child labor is very, very important, especially now with everything going on and some of the tariffs, et cetera. So everything is connected and everything is affecting all of these issues quite substantially right now. And in the governance area, what we have are ethics, very, very important, as well as compliance with the law, how you deal with risk, board diversity, trying to have more board diversity, as well as compensation policy. So you see all those things are so important. And then as it's evolved, we started with philanthropy and socially responsible investing. It's evolved to CSR, ESG ratings, integrated sustainability strategies, governance, and incremental sustainability. Impact investing has been very, very powerful and has a lot more potential than we've actually been leveraging. And now, until a few months ago, where we were at the stage of market transformation, really building markets that are sustainable and focusing on science-based targets and shared prosperity. So the question for tonight is, where are we headed now? And on the next slide, you can see that we have a lot of backlash. So while a couple of months ago, ESG is becoming mainstreamed and expanding, now it's under attack. So we have both things going on simultaneously, like Ashwani said, yes and no, all paradox at the same time. While sustainability professionals and scientists have been advocating for a complete economic system transformation towards science-based targets, what we call multi-capital accounting, and equitable, just, context-based allocation of resources, we are finding a lot of pushback and confusion about ESG. What does it mean? Is it good for business? And what are we doing here? So we're going to talk about that more in our panel and tonight. And on the next slide, which is my last slide, what we have is, I came across another, I thought, great article by a person named Solitaire Townsend, and it was in Forbes. And she talked about 4 things we need to sort of be present to right now. What do we do now? One is don't panic. For example, this isn't the first time sustainability has faced a backlash, a downturn, etc. And the worst thing we can do now is freeze in fear or despair. And momentum only stops, as we know from physics, if we let it. We need to adapt and reinvent. We need to be more adaptable. And I think Govi's going to talk a lot more about that. We need to keep going no matter what. We need to find different ways to move on. And again, we need to be celebrating and proud of the progress that we're making, the innovation that we're experiencing, and our problem solving. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Jim King, to make a few more welcoming remarks.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Gina. Jim King, I am the Senior Director for the Office of Career Management here at Rutgers Business School. What that means is we, as the Office of Career Management, support the over 10,000 students in the business school, anything from first-year undergraduates to our Doctors of Business Administration program. That covers 2 undergraduate programs in Newark and New Brunswick, as well as our full-time, part-time MBA students and about 13 specialized masters. When Gina came up to me and asked me about this event tonight, I was excited to see that we're going to have many of our terrific students here who are looking to connect and network with the industry, because we find that there is a growing recognition of the significance of sustainability and responsible business practices. In spite of what the media may be saying, there is still a complete focus on sustainable practices. It's things that what I like to say is people are doing good while they're doing well. And we need to be proud of the things we have done to date, but there's a lot more to do, a lot more to address climate change, a lot more to address proper corporate governance, a lot more to address lowering carbon footprint of all the businesses. And these are the kinds of jobs and careers that Rutgers Business School students are prepped for, as well as many of our Rutgers University students in many of our practices. Rutgers is a leader in this area, and to all of our business people out there, to all of our guests, I would really encourage you to think about developing an internship program and working with us to help get the experience for our students. Let them see what really goes on. Provide perhaps a mentoring opportunity or just network with our students. As we see this continue to grow, as we see this area continue to grow, I want my office to be much more understanding of the skill sets required to make our students prepared for opportunities in ESG. We know that they need to understand and have knowledge on environmental sustainability, on social responsibility, and on ethical governance. But it's also very big on technical skills around data analytics, around the ability to collect, analyze data, and report on those information and key findings. Because as someone mentioned earlier, it's about the science, it's about the facts, it's about having direct knowledge that we can provide to people in our consumers to understand the impacts that every individual makes, and more importantly, the impacts that these businesses are making. So I can see this as a growing area, and I can see this as an area that many of our students who are here tonight are interested in getting into and wanting to be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. So I encourage you to connect with me, connect with my office. I'm going to put our email in the chat. I look forward to tonight's event. And Gina, we're really happy as the Office of Career Management to participate with this, as well as other things that the Institute is working on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I also want to shout out to the Jim and the Office of Career Management, as well as the ACE team, which is also the sponsor for this. And that's the Alumni and Corporate Engagement team. All right. So with that, on the next slide, I wanted to set the stage for Govi's comment by calling up these Rutgers Business School has 4 R's, which couldn't be more timely and relevant: resilient, resourceful, responsible, and reinventing. So these 4 R's are the pillars of what we stand on at RBS. We are fortified in our resilience. We are creative in our resourcefulness. We are empowered by our responsibility, and we're strategic in our individual and collective reinventing. With that, I am going to introduce Govi. As I mentioned earlier, I've known Govi for several decades. He continues to inspire me always. He guest speaks in my MBA classes. He's a visionary thought leader. He has done amazing work in numerous industries and worked in chemicals, coatings, building materials, lighting. His current role is CEO of Phase Change Solutions, and he can tell you more about that. They have a vision to decarbonize our footprint and enable human health with sustainable solutions to manage temperature in any environment. Imagine the implications of that. And I first met Govi when he was at Philips Lighting, and I would say that he's one of the leading people that led to the transformation of the entire lighting industry away from incandescent bulbs to fluorescence and then to LEDs. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Govi. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. Thank you so much. Appreciate the introduction, and I'm not sure I'll try to live up to that if I can. Thrilled to be here, and I want to thank Gina, Deb, Aaron, Dan, and the whole team, and Jim for what Rutgers is doing as well. I'm part of many schools across the country in efforts like this, and Rutgers is doing a phenomenal thing. And I'll take the 6th R here, Gina, in addition to the 4 R's in Rutgers. The last name is Rao, so I can throw in an R there as well. It just fits in so nicely. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what's happening in the rest of the world as well here, because sometimes when we get myopic and look at what's happening here, we can get pretty sad and dejected. And you know, as Jamie was talking about, it is affecting a lot of us, and it's affecting some of us more than others. And there's a whole slew of the population that will actually bear the brunt of this. So I wanted to put this slide just to kind of talk. I happened to have the good fortune of spending a day with Mother Teresa, several decades ago. And I just shadowed her for one day and spent the time in her orphanage. And she gave me a card with, as I was leaving, with also 2 bags of letters she wanted us. She was just in Calcutta. She gave us 2 massive letters and saying, it saves me postage if you carry it with you and mail it in the US. This was a fundraising. It was massive, 2 massive bags of literally letters to people. However, I mean, 4 feet, some inches, the power of this woman and what she was trying to do. And so she mentioned a lot of things. And one of the things that she was specifically talked to us about is this. In fact, the 2 of us were shadowing her for the whole day. And she says, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the water to create many ripples. And what we have done, what we have been doing on the planet, will get destroyed, will get changed. Her point was, do it anyway. Because it's a cycle, and I think a few others had mentioned this earlier also, and in terms of trying to keep that spirit and keep going. So I want to kind of start with that as a moniker as we tackle the next few years, and why I feel it's more optimistic than not, because in spite of what's been happening and everything that Gina just mentioned, market transformations hasn't been without challenges. Some of them have been detrimental for the environmental aspects when I was in the chemical industry, and some not. So we've been fighting our way little by little, little by little. And now we have the capability in a global world that's connected. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to keep it as not as, I mean, away from politics, because there is a lot going on in the planet for us to be excited about. So as you see in the next slide, I don't need to talk to you about the changes that are happening in the world. I think Deb, if you can change it to the next slide, I can. Yeah, and you can build it as well. There you go. Thank you. These are all things that you've been reading about, in addition to the local noise that's happening coming out of DC or anywhere else. The natural disasters, the increasing this climate change. I don't need to repeat that. The nationalism aspect of it, whatever label you put on it, it's not just here in the U.S. It's happening worldwide. And then last but not least is this whole concept of technology, which is adding on to this fifth industrial revolution that we talked about. So I wanted to I'm sure most of you have heard of this. Those of you who attended Gina's class, you'll probably remember VUCA is a concept that is several decades old. It's a concept of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Looks like now that whole metric, I mean, the whole meter of VUCA has to get recalibrated because it's so noisy and so much going on. And especially starting off with the inauguration here with the government, et cetera, but also in the rest of the world. It's not just here in the US. So how do you deal with this? And I think a couple of people, the speakers I mentioned already, how do you deal with that in terms of a world that is highly volatile, extremely uncertain in terms of what's happening, ups and downs. Today there's a regulation, tomorrow it's backed off. There's a fight here in legal stuff, this is backed off. So that becomes very difficult. In fact, I was talking to a couple of other universities here in Jersey and in North Carolina, where I go back and forth. Students being asked to go home who are doing their PhD work here, months away from presenting their thesis. Interesting enough, it's for folks from China being issued notices saying that their funding is stopped. This is in the last 2 weeks. So people coming together and saying, well, you cannot do that. How can we fight? So uncertainty, and then of course it's a complex world, all interconnected. So as much as we talk about nationalism, I don't think any country can survive as an island by ourselves. It doesn't matter whether it's the US or China or France or India. We're all so interconnected now. This reframing is going to be happening, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, those of you who follow Davos will see how much of that movement has started. So as I will talk about the trends in the next slide, in the context of these global challenges, as we go through in discussion, in talking about the trends that are going on. So Deb, if you want to change to the next slide. So there are organizations like the World Economic Forum that's pulled Davos together, but also OECD, consulting companies like BCG, McKinsey, and a whole bunch of others. I just pulled a few, doing significant work in trend analysis. I'm sure Rutgers is doing its own, as other universities are. And in this particular context, what we've been doing also from a phase change perspective, from an industry perspective here, because the whole industry is now looking at what's going to happen to the IRA, the funding, are they going to pull back from decarbonization? So it's a lot of things happening in here. So if you take a look at this trends that are being pulled together from over 1,000 global companies and organizations, 14 million workers, give or take, across 22 different industries and in more than 50 economies around the world. The trends that came out from this kind of analysis is extensive. Then the next slide, I've highlighted a few of these, the top slides, the top trends that came out. So here, the concept of broadening digital access, right? So by the way, these are the trends that are going to impact each one of us, in pretty much everybody, the whole labor market. And the timeline is not 20, 30 years. It's by 2030, we literally have changes happening. In fact, this already started significantly. So the broadening digital access, and for those of you who are interested in Industry 5.0, Rutgers has a very good program, a curriculum on Industry 5.0. Look it up. It's a great class. Good professors, good exposure there as well of what is Industry 5.0. It's building on 4.0, added the component of sustainability, people, ecology, etc. It's just very, very powerful. I would encourage people to go and take a look at that. General slowdown because of what's happening in the world, and of course, coming out of the pandemic, in general, what's happening around multiple economies in the world, and climate change mitigation, and fighting fires in California and floods around the world. That's becoming a major transformative driver in the world, along with this most recent move in geoeconomic fragmentation, which is creating very, what I call geopolitical tension, right? There's a lot of tension. Not all of it is bad. It's a question of how do we deal with that. And along with that, you look at the demographic shifts with the aging population, and skill sets and what's happening around the world with migration. These were like the top of mind in leaders' mind, again, across 1,000 different employers, but also millions of people surveyed. And all of this drives to say, well, how do we deal with this? What kind of skill? It's not one skill. So even the whole concept of what are we training ourselves for as early career folks or in the education, the pipeline, or even folks who are in the workforce. This is going to be a challenging period for us to take a look at. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see what I've started doing is putting together the frameworks that are happening in the world. I've kind of put together one particular example here is the Davos, the World Economic Forum. And talking to folks who were there, I did not attend personally, but lots of discussions and dialogues, over 130 countries, 3,000 plus attendees, 50 heads of state, including our own, who went there to talk to people, and hundreds of governmental leaders and business leaders. So the concept there coming into this was rebuilding trust. And it's at the center of each one of us. As moves happen in the government, the current administration, how do you trust anything and everything coming out of there when it has a certain kind of paradigm, even the people who are making the changes. So keeping an eye on what's going on continuously, working through it. So Gina and Deb, are we going to send these slides out to people? Because I don't want to go through every link. But if
Yes,
people have,
we will send it out tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. So these actually have links. So each of these have links to the World Economic Forum, ton of information, whether it's reimagining growth and economies around the world, or looking at safeguarding the planet, so the ecology, the environmental aspect, and how do we take this whole thing about AI, which is machine learning and AI, and AI also not just artificial, but also augmented intelligence. What does it mean for us as a driving force? And that is, I mean, that was the most talked about thing at Davos and even the Congress before as well in COP28. So, and then last but not least is the concern about investing in people everywhere. I know Jerry mentioned earlier, I mean, this is a certain selection, self-selection of people who are attending this session this evening. How do we reach out to those who are not going to be in the same paradox of thinking? And I deal with this in my own company, because we are manufacturing and researchers in North Carolina. in Asheboro, North Carolina. It says, and I don't need to tell you, how the people think there, but in general, the concept of what is economy, what is government, the role of government, the education, and it's a thankless job. Again, go on and on and on. So it's each one of us need to continue doing that. And I know Jamie has mentioned this as well. It can feel so disheartening as we fight through it and it's interesting. The same people who actually, and I told you I won't be political, those who actually believed in that now are saying, oops, it's beginning to affect me. So what do I do? So we'll talk about that later on as well. So if you go through, I'll encourage you to go through and look at the links as well later on. But just to give you an idea about what's happening in generally in the world, global cooperation is beginning to get reframed. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about, so when you say global cooperation, and there are a few parameters that the survey looks at. This, of course, year over year over year. And if you look at this, it's actually higher than it was pre-pandemic. Although in the past couple of years, it's kind of flattened out, largely because of people looking at what's happening with the administration, etc. But cooperation around climate, natural resources, and digitization are actually rising. If you see, green is the one with the climate change aspect, right? So globally, we are actually collaborating a lot more, and that's why I mentioned before. We all know the butterfly effect, right? So we don't live in an island. What happens in New Jersey will probably affect folks, in Canada or in China or in Taiwan or in Australia. So, and that's people have begun to realize it. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle they're in. That realization has set in, and we have to continue doing it. So there is no respite. It doesn't change. In fact, Gina mentioned I was part of the lighting industry. In 2000, we started the transformation of the market to digital lighting, to this LEDs. And for the first 15 years, people laughed at us. It's not going to happen, not going to happen. And today, if you take a look at it, give or take, we're still at about I want to say optimistically, 45% penetration in the market worldwide. There's still a long way to go, in spite of all the work that's being done, right? I'm talking about globally. So that doesn't stop. And I've been technically out of the lighting industry, but not quite, because I still get pulled in, and we all continue to kind of keep that thing going. So that's why it's the global cooperation, both in the public sector and the private sector, is being reframed. So what are some of the top trends? Yeah, and you're right, Matt. This is all in the late 70s. None of this stuff I'm talking about is new, by the way. I was looking at a McKinsey article from 2007, talked about resilience in turbulent times. I was like, wow, I could just take the article today and it's so relevant. So yeah, most of these concepts are there. So that's why we have the confidence that we will see through this world. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about some of the trends that are hitting us everywhere. Like, for example, in the global context, and even here in the US, right? And you can see the administration here as well, but they lean towards crypto and AI, etc. So it's AI everywhere. You can see literally going from artificial intelligence. We joke about this, but this is beginning to become a integral part of our everyday lives, and that's a tremendous opportunity for all of us. Energy revolution is underway. I don't think they're stopping. We can do what we want here in the US. That revolution is well underway with clean tech. Even in the US, by the way, we are leading in nuclear, micronuclear, etc. So that part will happen, whether we drill for more oil or not. I'm not saying that's a good thing. That is going to be a revolution that cannot be held back any longer. And just as a small fact, by 2030, at least 20% of the global energy will go towards AI and data centers. And we're actually dealing with that now in our own business, where the demand to manage heat in data centers is absolutely staggering. And it's just crazy. And the amount of business opportunities there to manage heat, which is, of course, it will even get even worse as we talked about it. Healthcare breakthroughs are driving. That was also on people's minds as well, as we all recognize. The life expectancy has gone up. A lot of people now living closer to 100, over 100. And then what is being addressed now, it was also brought up in many conversations in Davos, is this concept of mental health. That I mean, personally, I believe we are not paying enough attention, and we should absolutely pay more attention to that. We're doing what we can in our own small circles. That's the thing. That's another thing. Again, with AI, it will make it worse if we don't pay attention to that. And the last but not least, I also talked about the aging population, and then the consumption aspect as we live longer. How are we going to manage that? So food being, avoiding waste, etc. So that's going to give you a quick idea of the high level trends. All of this is available on the web, by the way. I just kind of pull that together. And if you go to the next slide, it'll talk about, so what do we um, look at? What do we look at in terms of capabilities? What do we need? And a lot of questions about what do I need to learn? It doesn't matter where you are and what part of the value chain you're in. The key capabilities that this is a jobs report that came out, the future of work, from the World Economic Forum. There's a link in there as well. There you take the top 5 capabilities, and I'm not calling it skills because skills lead to capabilities, and skills know-how and talent. Resilience was top of the list there. And what resilience means. And of course, there is a ton of information on resilience and how to get there. And I think in Gina's class, we talked about that as well. And then along with that, analytical, critical thinking, and not just being part of groupthink. So how do we stop? It doesn't matter from which part of the paradigm you belong to. Just having that critical thinking capability is going to be huge. That's where technology is going to help as well. Adaptability, along with resilience, one of the key characteristics is how do we adapt and stay agile. So every one of us needs to be agile and adapt along. So this is one thing, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in our own company to help our workforce. Along with that, it's interesting, in Davos, this whole conversation on empathy and social influence. It's actually interesting how that sort of has not quite fallen off across the board, but in general, not enough attention. Now it's coming back full circle, along with this technology and AI. How do we actually integrate empathy and social influence? And last but not least is this whole concept of technological literacy. And it's become a lot easier. I mean, those of us who've used Copilot as AI, if you're using Microsoft and across the board, and being vigilant about that is going to be something that we need to pay attention. This is a major challenge for companies, organizations. However, I believe personally it's a tremendous level of opportunities for individuals. It doesn't matter where we are and what role we play in. So then if you go and say, drill this down into skills, in the next slide, I just kind of summarize what came out of this jobs report, etc. The top 10 skills that will shape the future as an idea. So it's about adapting and being flexible, but in general, and you're all seeing this list, etc., right? Problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, and there are resources available. Rutgers alone actually it covers pretty much all of the stuff in terms of if you really want to go take it. It doesn't have to be a 2-year program, but just generally staying adept and reading about this, right? And how do we get this to become the habit, a national habit? And a global habit, right? About adapting, being flexible, and constantly learning. This continuous learning thing is something that we've got to get in our midst sooner than later. So that we all are, I mean, that's an equalizer. Like I think the internet and education are 2 equalizers that will shape the future. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what are we doing in phase change. So we started with the individual, right? So first of all, we said we need, looking at our vision and where we're headed, we talked about who are we as individuals? What do we know about ourselves? So Deb, if you just go to the first one, the next slide. We start with it, and we've actually created the environment and given training and skills to one more build. Talk about us as individuals. So personal traits. What are our personal traits? Then on that we build the competencies, and we've narrowed it down to 5 competencies because, and again, this is not just for the leadership, this is for every employee across the board. And we can set a 2 to 3 year timeline where we need to really, all of us to get proficient in it. And we've selected 5. It was a whole process that we went through. This is an example of what we're doing. And we started this, we started this in summer of last year, right? And we didn't anticipate all of these changes, but we said this is what is required. And if we do this well, the outcome of this, the next build, Deb, will give you what we're calling the desired outcomes. And I'll go to the next. If you go to the next bill, Deb, that's the desired outcomes. I'll give you an idea. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about what are the desired outcomes, and I won't go through with all the. You don't need to read the entire thing. You'll get a slide. But these are the 5 or 6 outcomes that we said are critical for us. The vision, all of us being able to communicate with the vision, not just me as a CEO, but every employee, driving innovation and encouraging and enabling innovation across the board, building customer excitement along with trust internally, but also trust with customers, trust with our ecosystem, with our partners, and the concept of organizational stewardship. Each and every one of us needs to be good steward of all our stakeholders, not just about us as employees. And finally, being a results driven. So these are what we said across the board are our desired outcomes. So what are the competencies that will get us there? If you take each individual, and we had multiple programs to have each employee understand herself or himself, skill sets, whether you use Myers-Briggs or any other model, a DISC model, you begin to start with yourself. Where are you? What get excited? What makes you tick? And why are you here? Why are you? Is there a reason? So purpose-driven mission, purpose-driven organization, purpose-driven term. So we're looking also for purpose-driven individuals who actually are here because they want to. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about those 5 competencies that we came up with this last year. The 5 competencies for we call it our sprint. And of course, most of you recognize the competency is a collection of knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? That kind of enables us to kind of excel as a team, not just as individuals. So the 5 of them that we came up with for us is to give you an idea. To build that next build there, Deb. It's again entrepreneurial mindset, and for each of this we've laid out a detailed the explanation and how people can build it, with not just training but also workshops and videos and reading, etc. Financial business acumen in everyone, not just the folks in who are managers, every employee. And it's amazing since we launched this, the amount of learning that has happened, and we've actually had people share their learnings to the whole company. It's such an inspiring thing to look at. Collaboration and communication. This has gone by the wayside, especially after the pandemic. So most folks coming in from school have a different paradigm of communicating, which is not communicating. And we kind of have to unlearn and relearn about how do you collaborate. If you don't communicate, you cannot collaborate. And creative problem solving is another one we talked about. And last but not least is talked about the agility. It's a bias for action. So this is across the board. I'm not doing this only. We're not doing this just for leadership or managers. Every employee, and we're doing coaching, peer coaching, sharing of education programs, etc. So the reason is the outcome of this, we believe, is a resilient organization. If there's a supply chain challenge, the team comes together and solve it. If there is a technical challenge to the customer, the team comes together and solve it. We had somebody, an injury at a customer site. We had somebody from our group to solve it. So that resiliency is what we're trying to look at. And we have to get it at the individual level. And by the way, all of this employees I'm talking about is a global force. 90% of our workforce is in North Carolina, and the remaining 10% is spread around India, Ireland, and the rest of the US as well. So this we believe will give us that resilience that we're looking for. So and I want to make sure I give enough time for questions as well. So if you go to the last slide, this is my last slide here, just to give you an idea. Deb, if you can go to the next one, I just want to wrap up with this. One of my favorite books, for those of you who haven't read it, you should definitely get it. I'm sure you have. It's Frankel's Man's Search for Meaning. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. So purpose-driven life, and if you've read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about. So the bookends here, Mother Teresa and Viktor Frankl, to me, guiding light. It's phenomenal. I read Frankl probably once a year, if not more. Just at times you take it and you go through it and saying, well, if they were able to do that in the midst of the Holocaust, I think we can weather this storm pretty darn well. So thanks again for the opportunity, Gina, the team. I'll stop here to see if you have, again, dialogue, questions open. I apologize if I've gone over. I can go on. I just want to make sure I limit here and make sure others have time for the panel as well.
Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you.
You.
I'm tempted to I don't know if I could see people's hands though. If we wanted to take a couple of questions, and then we're going to turn it over to Alec. Does anybody have a burning question that you would like to ask Govi based on what he talked about? I'm going to look at the participants. I think I could see your hands there. I don't see anybody with their hand raised right now, I don't think. So I think we'll have more time later for some questions.
Gina, someone just raised
Yes.
their hand.
Oh, okay, Yennefer, one of my students. Hello, Yennefer.
Hi,
Go
good
ahead.
evening. I don't know if can you hear me?
Yes,
Govi, thank you for taking your time to speak to us. It was very inspiring to hear you speak and your role models. I'm definitely intrigued to read about Victor and Mother Teresa. But I guess my question for you, not question, just piece of advice is, with everything going on in our country, and like you said, not to get political, but I'm actually starting a political movement myself with my peers in school, just to educate people on knowing their rights, immigrant communities, US citizens, just basically to make a stand for policies that don't benefit us. So I never done this before. I already created like a group me with some peers. It's I think like 25 people sign up, and we're arranging a meeting to meet and come up with strategy and plans of action. So as a first timer, what advice would you give somebody who's trying to make an impactful movement and inspire others to do something good for the world, I guess?
Hey, Jennifer, that's actually a whole different seminar by itself. However, congratulations. That's phenomenal that you're doing it. Absolutely fantastic. You have my details. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people here who would want to help. There's a movement like this that actually have been we started in RPI. Again, some PhD students who actually got this concern, and at NJIT as well. So there is a movement. I mean, you're part of that leading edge here. So congrats again, and let's connect offline, and I'll connect you to the resources, and if you need any help at all you need. Now, I'm not talking about months from now. Right now, the need is here. So there's a lot to be said and done in this part. So first of all, congratulations, and yes, I will help personally, being an immigrant myself and helping others as well. In fact, there was a part of my conversation yesterday for 4 hours with students who got letters asking them to move back. So yes, I'll definitely help.
I
Let's
will.
reach out.
I
Appreciate
will
that.
Thank you, Yennefer. Okay, I'm going to take one more question, then we need to move on. Matt Polsky.
Hi, Gina.
Hi.
Hi, Govi. Looking back, even over, recently, but even over the decades, why do you think we're in this position that we're in? I would have thought years ago we would be further ahead and we would not be so vulnerable to what's happened over the last few months. Did we get something wrong? Did we not do something that we should have done? Or, did we do everything right and this is just, the times that we're in that nobody could have foreseen?
Matt, I'm sure people have opinions on that. My personal opinion in talking to a bunch of people, one perspective is the pendulum shifts, right? I mean, why we are in this position by when. So we were in this mode of hyper globalization, if you remember. We let some of the industrial policies drive away, and the social impact stuff didn't really take off as we anticipated. And of course, the pendulum has actually shifted now. And with the middle class, if you take a look at what's happened to the middle class in this country and other places, the middle class being affected has shifted the tide. And the question is, we have to start reaching out. As again, to the quote unquote the other side, or folks who don't understand, which is what we are doing, by the way, in our own communities as well. Taking sides is no longer an option. So reframing this is going to be key. And it's not easy, by the way. We've had, extremely challenging discussions in fact, the last, Trump 1.0 broke families, broke relationships. And we've been part of and we're beginning to mend that as we speak as well. It's not easy and it's very difficult. We have people who actually, marriages have broken up, organizations have split, partnerships have split. And now the concept of, appreciative inquiry. How do you leverage some of these things to say reaching out and kind of making? How did it happen? Well, lots of reasons. I think it's not just here in the US. You take France, you take India, you take other places, similar thing. And we are beginning to see the motion of the world recognizing it. So more to come. Matt, you and I love to kind of chat a little bit as well, because there's also a whole discussion on the industrial policy, government intervention in private sector, what's happening there and why the swing, etc. Populism, nationalism, is that really going to help? I mean, now people are beginning to realize that it begins to hurt us if you drive all the way. So my gut feel is you'll see, because of the pushback that you, me, Jamie, and everyone else around the table here will start pushing back. You'll see that moving more central. We may not like a lot of these things, however, there's stuff that actually will benefit. So this is exciting, by the way. Tremendous opportunity for us to say, you know what, you want to fight? We'll give you one. We'll take it on. So,
All right. Thank you so much. Let's hear it for Govi. I really appreciate it.
thank you.
All right. Now we're going to move on to have Dr. Alexander Gates on the next slide, I believe. There he is. The Distinguished Service Professor at Newark School of Arts and Science. And he will be talking about how past victories over pollution can help us defeat the climate crisis. And his book, which I will explain after he speaks, how we are going to be raffling off, with your help, 3 copies of his book, Reclaiming Our Planet, How Environmental History Can Help Solve the Climate Crisis. Thank you. Alex?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so basically that's the title of my talk. And so I am going to move right into it because I know we're running late. So next slide, please. Okay, so biggest problem going these days is that there is so much information out there, misinformation, disinformation, undigested science. And I'm the chair of the Climate Action Plan for Newark, and heck, I built the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences, so I was chair for 20 years. And basically, I've run into people in influential spots, not just the elected officials, who are deny that there's any climate problems. They'll say climate change is a natural thing, so you don't have to worry. It always changes. That is true. It does always change. But climate change is from us. It's anthropogenic, but we don't really have to worry about it. Climate change is real, but all we can do is slow it down. And then there's the ones that say we're all doomed. There's nothing we can do about it. And so you can see there's a variation of what people think. And I'm going to show you that all those people are wrong. Next. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple things that maybe people know about already. So on the left-hand screen, you can see that CO2 is increasing. We went up the biggest jump ever at 4 parts per million this past year. We're up around 427 right now. And if you look in the carbon dioxide curve is on the right-hand side, that's the green one. And it's just lockstep with the temperature. So those temperatures are increasing. Now it's a little confusing because carbon dioxide is also natural. It occurs naturally. You exhale it all the time. So how the heck are we supposed to tell the difference between carbon dioxide that we exhale and that comes from burning of fossil fuels? And there's a way to do it, because carbon has an atomic weight of 12 normally, but you can also have a couple isotopes. One is carbon-13 and one is carbon-14. And we all know that carbon-14 we use for dating things that were made in human times. And so all carbon that is going in and out of our lungs and going in and out of the respiratory system has a certain amount of carbon-14 in it. The problem is after about 28,000 years, there's no carbon-14 left. So the carbon dioxide with no C14 in it is called dead carbon. And so if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, it shows you that we had you can see from 1,000 to 1,200, 1,400, we had this kind of ratio of how much carbon dioxide we had and then the amount of C13 versus C14, and mirroring how we're increasing in carbon dioxide in the environment is exactly how much we're losing all of our carbon 14, which is shown in the tan curve. So we can see that carbon 14, that dead carbon dioxide, is a pollutant. So I'm going to show you that this stuff is really a pollution issue, and we've solved pollution issues before. Next slide, please. Okay, so is this abnormal, have this much carbon dioxide? Here's from an ice core. You can see what the carbon dioxide has been for the last 800,000 years. And it never crossed that 300 parts per million line. And here we're at 427. So is it abnormal? Absolutely. Next slide, please. Okay, so, and we got bad things happening because of that. So all these, I can tell you guys all know about this, so I'll go over it quickly. What kind of bad things are happening because of the global climate change? So we can see on the left-hand side that the sea level is rising, and it wasn't too bad until about 1980, but since then it just keeps accelerating. So it's not only going up, but it's getting faster every year, and it's up about 9 inches total. Okay, so that's the first thing. We know, hey, we're watching the TV set and looking out the window last year, and the TV set, we can see all the wildfires. So it's drying everything out, something awful, and it makes it so we can get wildfires. So the top picture shows how much wildfire acreage has been. We pretty much had wildfires under control by the 1970s, and now since the 1980s, it's just skyrocketed. So stuff out in California, it's going to be everywhere. And then the next thing is on the bottom is the sea surface temperature. And so that's kind of mirroring our regular air temperature. And the problem with that is once you cross that threshold of 79 degrees on the sea surface temperature, it means that it's going to increase the strength of hurricanes. And so we've seen these hurricanes now undergo, this rapid intensification, which is a new phenomenon. And we're going to be able to take those hurricanes, which normally fell apart by the time they crossed the Carolinas. You warm it up here, and we're going to wind up with big hurricanes, Category 3 hurricanes, reaching New York City in this area, which would be catastrophic. So those are things we got to watch out for that are happening. Next slide. Okay, and we know, with the temperatures going up, why the sea level is rising, because we're losing all of our ice. So you can see on the left lower hand side is the Arctic ice loss. So you can see in 1980 all the way to 2012, and that was 13 years ago, we've lost a lot of the ice up in the Arctic, and it falls apart every year. So where does that water go? It goes into the ocean, and that's why ocean levels are rising. If you look at go out to our Glacier National Park, right? Because it was named for all the glaciers. 32 when we started, but it's down to 8 decent sized ones, and all of them are disappearing. Some of them are 85% gone. So all of those alpine glaciers are disappearing too. And so the picture up on the upper right-hand corner shows you the warm temperatures and why we usually are safe from hurricanes up here. All the warm stuff is down south of in North Carolina. All that area is getting warmer, which means hurricanes that normally only could hit to the Carolinas will all of a sudden be able to start hitting our area as well. Next. Okay, so if this is a pollution issue, I can go through a bunch of pollution issues that we actually defeated. And I'm going to say that CO2 is a pollutant, and we do the same thing, and we can be just as successful as we have in the past. So let's start. We got 3 things I'm going to look at. DDT, from which Rachel Carson went after, lead that Claire Patterson went after, and also SO2 and acid rain. So next slide, please. Okay, so DDT was a nasty, it was a fantastic pesticide that was developed early on, but found to be a pesticide in the late 30s, and it did wonders during World War II, and they started putting it everywhere. So if you grew up in the 50s and 60s, the trucks used to go up and down the streets, and they would mist would come out and all the kids would run behind the truck and try to get DDT mist all over themselves. And it was in everything. And so it wound up so that people were getting it in their body systems. And so in the 60s and even into the 70s, there was so much DDT in mother's milk that they were advised not to nurse their babies because you could give them a toxic dose of DDT. And if you look at the picture over there on the upper left, you'll see that that was how much DDT was in the milk that we were drinking every day in cow's milk, and that's a log scale. So we're up in the multiple thousands of range, at least 5,000 to 6,000, micrograms per kilogram in milk fat. And it just fell apart. It's all the way down to, you can see it was down to 400 by 1990. And now there's basically no DDT in anything. So it dropped by 94%. We knocked out the DDT, which was a very bad thing. And one of the bad things that it did was that it would bioaccumulate and biomagnify up the food chain. And so the raptors had more DDT in them than anything. And what happened was with bald eagles is it went into their eggshells. And when the mothers would sit on their nest to brood, they would crush the eggs. So by the 1967, we were down to 419 mating pairs of bald eagles. And they banned DDT, and was one of the first things they did when they made the EPA. They banned DDT in 1972, and you can see the rapid growth on the upper right-hand side. By 2022, 2021, we're up to 320,000 bald eagles. The same thing happened with peregrine falcons. There were no peregrine falcons east of the Rocky Mountains. Now they're all over the place. We now have more brown pelicans, which they were almost gone, in the United States now than were there before Europeans showed up. So the reality is we banned DDT and everything repaired. Okay, so you can see 1419 by 1963, 320,000 now. So that's how fast they recovered. Another thing was lead. We used to use lead, and that's the lower left-hand side. And that was Rachel Carson, by the way, that went after DDT. Lead was terrible. Basically, we were at the point where 2% shy of children in the United States being outright lead poisoning. It was in, it's in paint. It was in gasoline. It was in pipes. We still see it in pipes sometimes. It was everywhere. And so Claire Patterson was a scientist from Caltech who single-handedly went after lead and went and raised the consciousness. So everybody got furious about this being so much lead, and they went after the government, and lead was taken out of everything. And the amount of lead in children's, the average lead content in children's bloodstream in the United States has decreased 97% since 1980. So basically the lead problem, besides some legacy lead issues like Flint, Michigan, or maybe even in Newark, besides that, there is no lead in the United States. So we beat that problem completely. The same with, we had acid rain everywhere. It was in our lakes and killing things off. People had to wear masks because of it. It was destroying our infrastructure and antiquities. And we decided to get rid of the SO2 in the atmosphere, which is the major component of acid rain. And we decreased from 1980 down to 2020, we decreased the amount of SO2 in our atmosphere, in our rain, by 94%. It is now the same as it was in 1890. So these things and a bunch of other things, if you want to read the book, we beat them. We just did the right thing and attacked it. We got everybody, we had public outrage. We got people to think to talk to their elected officials, and it was acted on. Next slide, please.
Okay, we need to wrap it up, but thank you. This is very interesting.
All right, well, I'll give you a couple more then. Okay, so the big thing is I'll wrap it up, but basically this is all we do now. And We have, so we got about 4.5% on a national level is what is coming out of all these things we think we're doing, solar energy and wind energy and things like that. And we had used more fossil fuels last year than we ever used in the past. And so we're not even in the ballpark of it. And the problem is we're just looking at a couple of things when there are a bunch of things that we can use that can do it. And we're talking about geothermal. We're using 5% of the high temperature geothermal, which will generate electricity. We can have geothermal locally. I'm on a project up at Cornell where they're going to get rid of fossil fuels and just use geothermal for their whole area. And you can use algal biofuels. Instead of just going to EVs, algal biofuels can work in cars, and they will take 1.3 to 1.8 ounces of CO2 out of the atmosphere for every ounce that's produced. So we can actually reduce CO2 in the atmosphere and bring it back to the levels we want, and we can probably do it in about 40 or 50 years. So you want to see more? Take a look at the book. Thanks.
Okay, well, that was fascinating. We have more slides and we'll send them all out tomorrow. So thank you so much. This was great. All right, so I'm going to turn to our panel in a moment. But first, I just wanted to mention how we're going to be raffling off Alex's great book, Reclaiming Our Planet. So if you could go back to the last slide, the one before this. Yeah. So on May 1st, RICSI, the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation, is going to be having its first ever Corporate Social Innovation Excellence Awards. We've been working on this for months now, and we're going to be recognizing organizations and individuals who are demonstrating the excellence in terms of achieving social good and supporting the business. We have a number of different awards that you can see for both corporate as well as individuals, and they're organized around the 4 pillars that I reviewed earlier. So on the next slide, what you can see is how we're going to be, how we've decided to share Alex's book on the right there, and there's a QR code there on the left. And that QR code takes you to literally nominations where you can right now in the next hour and through tomorrow morning, nominate people or organizations that you think exemplify our 4 pillars of giving back to society, aligning profit and purpose, engaging in responsible business practices, and advocating for social issues. You don't have to have all the information. Just give us a nomination with a little bit of information. You can do it anonymously, or you can just give us their name and contact. And then by tomorrow morning at noon, we're going to select 3 of the people who nominate people. And we will then follow up with you to actually send you this book with a personal signature card embedded in the book. And we will put that, either give that to you in person or mail it to you. So that's the story on that. Click on the QR code. I'll leave it up for another few seconds so everyone has it. And then you can do that anytime this evening or up till noon tomorrow. And with that, I am thrilled to turn the session over to my wonderful colleague, Erin Byrne, on the next slide. And she has been with us for 3+ years, I think, as our distinguished executive in residence at the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation. After a very stellar career at Novo Nordisk and J&J, and we love working with Erin. So I'm turning it over to Erin now.
Great. Thanks, Gina. And thanks, Alex. My goodness, I took so many notes. I can't wait to get your book. I learned so much in this short amount of time. So thank you for that. And Govi, thank you for setting the stage for this wonderful event that we have and discussions tonight. A couple of things that I wrote down were really around purpose-driven, resilience, and agility. And agility takes me back to my corporate days because I feel like that's such a corporate world that everyone needs to be agile, but it's so true in today's time, especially in the past couple of weeks and what we're going through when we look at what's happening, in our country with sustainability and social impact. But I do believe that we're going to be resilient, and I think we'll hear a lot from our panel around that. And the purpose-driven leadership, I think that's all of us here tonight. Especially when you hear somebody like Jennifer that is really taking the charge from a student perspective, and kudos to you. So we have a wonderful panel. I know Gina had introduced everyone earlier, but I just want to give a quick introduction. Rebecca Lubeau, Francine Chu, Mark Malik, Ben Gawaki, and Sam Couchy. You can see their titles there, and we're gonna jump right into it. I mean, the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation is really about how businesses can be equipped to address societal needs, because we know that government can't do it alone, and now we're also in a position where the government may not be always in agreement with the direction on some of these issues. And so that's really what we're here to talk about. So thank you all for joining me. And if I can just start off by handing it over to you, have you introduce yourselves a little bit about what you do every day, and a little bit about maybe your career and how your perspectives in ESG has evolved, and then we'll dig right in. So Rebecca, why don't we start with you?
Great. Thank you, Erin. And thank you, Gina, for having me here. So I recently started my own consulting firm, but I began my career in the White House. I ran a couple congressional campaigns. I've worked for a state senator, a U.S. senator. I've been the director of a nonprofit. I am a proud Rutgers alumna. I have my PhD from Rutgers, New Brunswick. I focused mainly in political and legal history. I also have a separate master's from the London School of Economics. I'm currently a visiting associate at the Eagleton Institute for Politics, and I also taught for about a decade in Rutgers, Newark, in the Federated History Department, so NJIT students and Rutgers history students, including during Trump's first 100 days. So I taught upper level undergraduates in the history of foreign affairs. So again, I'm thankful to Gina and Rixie for allowing me to talk during his first 100 days and really help analyze what the epic 2024 election means for ESG and sustainability. And as to your second question, Erin, about how my perspective on ESG has evolved over the last few years, I was in part invited here by my client, the executive director, Richard Lawton of the New Jersey Sustainable Business Council. And he had really suggested to me early on that, as Govey and some others mentioned, that ESG can be thought of either as cyclical or on a pendulum. And so the New Jersey Sustainable Business Council's mission is to promote policy and market innovation geared towards a triple bottom line, towards people, planet, and profit, rather than sort of an old school way of maximizing the profit for shareholders. So we do have to keep in mind, I guess, that corporate ESG policies are first and foremost about legal compliance, not necessarily about implementing visions of social and racial justice or gender equality or sustainability. But we were, I think, moving in that direction, and it seems that sort of the Trump agenda may be steering us back towards the latter, towards that antiquated maximizing of profits for shareholders. But there's definitely tools at our disposal and very many other positives. So that's what we'll be discussing.
Perfect.
So thank you.
Thank you. Mark, why don't we jump to you?
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I've been in finance for about 35 years. My current role is I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Siebert Financial, where I manage an $18 billion portfolio, largely equities. And I'd say about 6 or 7 years ago, my investment committee came to me with a mandate to start reporting the average ESG ratings for my portfolio. And the reason that they gave me was, well, there's going to be a huge wealth transfer that's going to occur from one generation to the other. And I think that's like the Gen Zs and the millennials, the zillennials, and they're going to be more interested in impact investing. So we need to start sort of focusing on that and make sure we get a handle on that. And so it started with that, and it ultimately turned into a mandate to actually start constraining my portfolio to fit certain ESG ratings. And so, of course, a person who has, spent his entire career focusing on being a shareholder, not a stakeholder, it started to raise questions on, what's the most optimal way to do this? Whether you believe in it or not, you have your home life and you have your work life. But in my work life, my job has always been maximizing shareholder returns. So obviously, I've been focusing a lot of that for many years. That sort of came to a head when I started, I'd say about 2 years ago, and I'm right now studying to get my doctorate, also at Rutgers. And my research is focusing on ESG. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But from my perspective, I've always been focused on sort of running it to the ground in terms of quantification. I'm a quant, which means I do everything by the numbers. And the good news is I know that I can, prove anything using numbers, right? So, I think that this is an age-old pursuit in the industry, but I feel like we have a lot under our belt right now. There's a lot of great research out there. But the stuff that I'm studying right now, the stuff that I'm writing my dissertation on, is very applicable to our, to what I do on a daily basis, the quantification of all this stuff, and obviously it's becoming even more important, as I said earlier, as we sort of warmed up. The events of the last couple of months has thrown into sharp focus the requirement for us to sort of in terms of being resilient and evolving, we have to start looking at that and operating in a different framework. So that's what I'm all about. I can't wait we had a great panel here, so you guys are in for a treat.
Great, thanks. Yes, we definitely are. Francine, if we can go to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. And to echo comments and sentiments, thank you for having me. I lead corporate impact at Guardian, which includes really 3 bodies of work. One is corporate social responsibility. That's the strategic philanthropy, a lot of the community engagement, sustainability, and also our inclusive procurement. That really means that I think my role on this panel is to serve as a practitioner, if you would, and someone who's sitting in 3 different conversations right now at the moment. I think there are tons of convenings happening about what does this mean for this work and for various organizations. I'll say that what I share is really from across the industry. It's not representative of what Guardian in particular is doing. I really want to make that clear. But my work, my background, gosh, I've been an investment banker in just traditional banking and also equity capital markets. For a time, I was head of policy and content for Prudential's $1 billion impact investing fund. I've also been a co-head of a charter school and the founding program officer for Goldman Sachs's 10,000 Small Businesses Initiative, its $500 million initiative. So I've had a range of roles that really have sat at that intersection of really social good and business priorities. And that's the lens that I'll share today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Ben.
Thank you, Erin. Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Glavatsky. I do sustainability strategy and market insights for BSF Corporation here in Florham Park. So a little bit about me. Right now, I really sit at the intersection of sort of innovation and business. And I think when I look back at my career, that's sort of where I've been. We talk about policy as drivers a lot, and I think that seems to be the topic today, but it's amazing how much influence we as consumers have. And that's really what I've spent my career in the chemical industry doing, is to develop these alternatives from an innovative perspective, giving consumers that choice, that more sustainable choice, if you will. And worked for some pretty large companies, all chemical companies, but always working on that innovation front to forward sustainability in that respect. So now I'm a little bit more on the business side, trying to provide that business perspective, but also have a degree in biology. So I'm kind of mixing my biology and my business, and really trying to put innovation forward and really drive that. And also gives me a perspective on the time frame. I think sometimes we can kind of tend to look at shorter time frames. I think just from experience, I've always looked at things in a much longer time frame, because things do take a little bit more time. So hope to bring some of that perspective into our discussion today, but good to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Sam.
Good evening, everybody. Sam Caiucci. I'm the founder and a CEO of Newark-based One Huddle. One Huddle is a early stage technology company that transforms corporate skill building and training and development programs into mobile first games. So from my vantage point, we've been lucky enough to work with several hundred global brands. We've had over 50 million skill games completed on our platform, of which 82% of our gameplay are hourly frontline workers who, as we all know, maybe don't get the same learning opportunities as everybody else does. I'm excited to join everybody today. A great panel, ready to roll.
Awesome. Perfect. So let's dive into it. I mean, I know the title of this event is the Epic 2024 election, right? So I think we need to start there. What I think is fantastic is we're going to go from, Rebecca, your analysis, and give us a rundown of what your perspective is of what's happening and what it means to that of the financial markets and practitioners, as well as, what this means for education, employees, and those in current roles, and questioning what the future holds, as well as those who might want to get into these roles because they are those passion-driven, purpose-driven, rather, individuals. So with that, Rebecca, can you give us the lay of the land? Start us off. We're all watching the news. We're seeing the headlines. We're seeing the executive orders. But can you just kind of lay that foundation for us of what is really happening from, the policy standpoint and when it comes to ESG?
Absolutely. Thank you, Erin. So overall, as you've been seeing, there's so much to discuss, so much to digest. President Trump has signed more than 75 executive orders, memos, and proclamations during just his first 22 days in office. And this is a far faster pace than any of his predecessors. And these have included 7 that fall under the umbrella of environment or energy and climate, and 7 that fall under DEI. Of those 75. And to put that number in perspective, Trump signed 220 executive orders during his first 4 years in office. So in his first week alone, he was already something like 6% towards that quota. And this pace would put him on a path towards about 5,200 executive orders. I did the math. I'm the daughter of a mathematician. FDR had signed about 3,721 during his 3+ years in office, 3+ terms rather in office. So I thought I would just take a case study under environment and just focus on clean energy and renewables, and sort of do the same, a case study or two under DEI, and talk about governance briefly. So for the environment, first, the good news that a recent report from Climate Power, published in January, states that since August 2022, companies have announced more than 406,000 new clean energy jobs. So that's driving about $422 billion in new investments across 48 states and Puerto Rico. And looking at renewables, I decided to take offshore wind as a specific example of the new Trump administration directives really affecting both states and companies' environmental and energy policies almost immediately. So To go back about a week prior to the election, New Jersey Congressman Van Drew, he's a longtime opponent of offshore wind. He announced that Trump had reached out to him for help drafting an executive order, which in and of itself is unusual, to put a stop on offshore wind projects. And sure enough, on his first day, Trump signed an executive order temporarily halting offshore wind lease sales in federal waters and pausing the issuance of approvals, permits, and loans for both onshore and offshore wind projects. And so New Jersey's offshore wind industry had already been suffering blows, pardon the pun. A week before the 2020 general election, Ørsted, a Danish company, had pulled out of its commitments to a project called Ocean Wind 1, which was won in New Jersey's first offshore wind solicitation. And then when Trump was elected this past November, New Jersey advocates were worried, but they thought that at least 3 projects that had obtained all of their federal and state permits, their COP, their construction operations plan approvals, would move forward. And then about a week or so ago, maybe a little over a week ago, Shell, on its 4th quarterly earnings call, announced that it would be writing down its $996 million investment in Atlantic Shores. And although EDF Renewables, which is the other part of the joint venture, said it was still all in, they have their offshore wind renewable energy credits, their ORECs, they can use litigation as a tool, and we'll talk more about litigation and tools in a minute. The media, and I don't think this was actually deliberate disinformation or misinformation, which is also rampant, but the media interpreted Shell's announcement of a write down as either a write off or a pause, or in some outlets, a complete pullout of the Americas. So that precipitated a response, I think, in the state, at the state level. So the New Jersey Board of Utilities, they announced that it would not be moving forward with its 4th solicitation, saying it would be an irresponsible decision at this time. The New Jersey Economic Development Authority announced that it would look for other uses of its New Jersey wind port, which is a first of its kind state-sponsored port, specifically for offshore wind. And then the Murphy administration added that it would no longer provide financial backing to new wind projects. However, on the upside, I had contacts in New York, those working on offshore wind projects. They're also, put on pause, at least for now. Those folks have a rosier outlook. And I think in part it's because a majority of those projects are on private land. But also a rosier outlook coming from the 4th quarter earnings call, which differed from Shell's, from the company NextEra. Because they also, very similarly, they develop both gas and renewable projects. They did a cost analysis. During their call, they stated that wind and solar are ready to install now, and these, firmed with battery storage, provide a lower cost of energy for customers. And so the bottom line, which I think Alec was mentioning, is that if President Trump wants to pursue the 500 billion plus investments in AI and data centers that he has been promoting, they will need electricity. And an all of the above approach is really the most feasible. And so there are tools to manage, I think, the administration's directives. One is actually just strategic messaging, which I think folks were talking about in the chat a little bit. It's working with companies to change their strategic messaging. It's something my firm does. For example, messaging that will resonate on both sides of the aisle. So energy reliability, security, independence. Also, like all of those will really, I think, resonate more strongly than some of the past messaging we've been using. And overall, just to sum up the environment, we're going to see legislative and regulatory bodies focus more on quote, traditional environmental topics. So pollution control, waste management, and those that have been wronged, like companies, towns, or individuals, they're going to use the tool of going to court. So litigation in the courts. And we'll also see probably more legislation moving at the state level. So that's a third tool that's available to states. Companies, by the way, can also influence legislation, and that's something I work on, my company works on. And if you have any tools, by the way, that you want to throw into the chat, since we are on Zoom, any thoughts on other resources that you can think of at your disposal in terms of being reactive or even better proactive to the administration's directives, I'm sure that's welcome in the chat. I can think of at least one more. You can ask me later if there's time. But moving on quickly to social, the S in ESG. As you know, there's been a lot in the news, and Trump was quoted when questioned about the DEI content that's been pulled down from government websites, like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention sites were scrubbed. Their social vulnerability index disappeared from the World Wide Web. So he was questioned on that and he responded, you may have seen, it doesn't sound like a bad idea to me. DEI would have ruined our country and now it's dead. I think DEI is dead. So if they want to scrub the websites, that's okay with me. And then he added, I don't know if you've been watching, but we got rid of woke over the last 2 weeks. Woke is, quote, gonzo. So we know that DEI is not dead. And calls for corporate initiatives, like we're saying, focused on DEI, have been more fervent in the last year. They've intensified at the start of President Trump's second term, as we've been discussing. In fact, we've seen studies that say that the mentions of both DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion in earnings calls have actually been dropping. They dropped roughly 82% since Q2 of 2021, according to one study. Companies have been talking less about DEI. They're reframing the narrative when they do. And this has been occurring even before Trump's second inauguration. Several of America's largest companies have already been buckling to political and shareholder activists. They're rolling back their commitments to DEI. And you may have seen this in the news. There's a huge list of ones that are rolling back. There's like Amazon, Booz Allen Hamilton, Disney. Disney is an interesting case study. You might have heard about that. That just made the news, I believe, yesterday. And that really speaks to the pressure that brands are facing in adjusting to all of these new expectations in the second Trump era. But Disney said that they would replace the diversity and inclusion performance factor and come up with a new talent strategy factor that will actually include components of its old diversity and inclusion factor, but is more focused on how values drive business sources. It's getting rid of its Reimagine Tomorrow initiative and the website. And that was used to highlight stories and talent from underrepresented communities. The company has also rebranded its business employee resource groups to Belonging Employee Resource Groups. And they're removing autoplay content, advisory disclaimers that run before older titles on Disney. So films that had warned in advance before you viewed it, then the warning would include negative depictions or mistreatments of peoples or cultures will be in this film. So you would see that on like Disney Plus, Dumbo, Peter Pan. I'm sure you've all seen these. So I used to show actually the U.S. History 1 students clips of Song of the South, specifically to examine tropes of different groups of peoples in the antebellum South. So I use that to actually demonstrate tropes. But Disney, as you may know, has really prided itself on being family friendly. It says it doesn't get involved in politics. And when Bob Iger returned to the company as CEO in 2022, he really made it a priority to lean into what he said was the company's original values. And so that seems to be working. And at least Disney's reputation score among Republicans has jumped significantly this past year compared to 2023, according to at least one poll. But there's so many other companies. I won't run through them all. Goldman Sachs, Google. As a federal contractor, they felt that they really needed to comply with President Trump's executive orders opposing DEI policies. McDonald's, there's so many more. Another quick interesting case study, Target. Last week, Target really did a complete about face. In 2020, As you may know, George Floyd's murder happened about 10 minutes from Target's headquarters. And so Target quickly pledged to increase its Black workforce by 20% throughout the company over about a 3-year period and take other steps that they said would advance racial equity. The following year, Target pledged to spend more than $2 billion with Black-owned businesses by the end of 2025. They added products from about 500 Black-owned vendors. They pledged $100 million to support the community, Black-led nonprofits, provide scholarships to students attending HBCUs. And at that point, Target CEO Brian Cornell said that the focus on diversity was adding value, it was driving sales, it was bringing greater engagement. And then he said it was just the right thing to do for our business today. Well, fast forward to last week, and he now thinks that being that vocal drove away some of its customers. In fact, in July, Target was actually sued by shareholders who believed diversity initiatives caused profit losses. And recently, the company announced it was rescinding its 2020 initiatives. It was further evaluating corporate partnerships. It was changing its supply diversity team, and it would work more broadly on including small business without specific regard to race. And they're focused on belonging, right? So belonging is an essential part of their team and culture. So Target is stressing also in its statement the need to stay in step with the evolving external landscape. So again, pointing to how the tide has shifted since its pledges in 2020. So Meta, Google, Target all cited either Trump's executive orders directly or the political landscape in their decisions to roll back DEI initiatives. However, on a more positive note, many companies have publicly defended their DEI policies. There's American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, United Airlines, Delta. Delta in particular said the airline remains committed to DEI and ESG policies because, quote, they are critical to our business. And we can send around, there's a study by Littler that came out on January 10th, and it included maybe lesser known businesses. They surveyed about 322 US companies in November of 2023. And they said that executives were still committed to DEI despite this rising backlash against it. So we can certainly send that around. I won't go into it. But a note on the moniker DEI itself, Littler, for its part, used the term IE&D. So inclusion, equity, and diversity to show their prioritization of inclusion. So as we've heard, companies like Target and Disney are using the word belonging by itself. And I think in the DEI space, companies are starting to look at more of a holistic picture. And unfortunately, they're also weighing in the fact that there might be social media campaigns that will be run against them. You may have seen that by Trump, his political advisors, like Elon Musk, attacking companies around DEI. We're also seeing companies really take a close look at what they're doing and why they're doing it. And finally, very quickly on governance, I know we don't have a lot of time, but we have seen an increase in lawsuits by states and non-governmental organizations. We've seen that during Trump 1.0. There were about 156 multi-state lawsuits, according to Ballotpedia. And Earth Justice happened to be the organization that filed the most lawsuits as far as NGOs are concerned, at least during the first 2 years of his first term. But we're already seeing a great increase in litigation since Trump's second inauguration. And really, as you may have seen, the Trump administration action with the most legal challenges is the executive order ending automatic birthright citizenship. So 8 court cases currently exist, and Democratic state attorney generals and civil rights groups have really filed the lawsuits. The order was paused by a U.S. District Judge on January 23rd, who found that the order did blatantly violate the 14th Amendment. And then since then, 2 more judges have blocked Trump's order ending birthright citizenship for babies of people who are in the U.S. illegally. So there is an appeals process. In fact, a reporter asked Trump directly yesterday if he would follow court orders, and he responded, "I always abide by the courts, and then we'll have to appeal it." And he repeated that about 3 times. So there's an appeals process going on today. There were about 3 different issues that White House lawyers were seeking to overturn. But so far, it's worth noting that the emergency cases have not gone well for the president. And last night, the White House actually lost its first appeals case. There was a 3-judge panel in Boston upholding a decision to block Trump's federal funding freeze. So these orders, they're temporary, but they may remain in place for weeks, if not months. And really, to just end on a positive note, I think these topics will continue to be an evolving area. They're cyclical, I think, as Govi mentioned, and it's really critical for corporate resilience to focus on these. I think also to Govi's point and Alex's, that many US entities operate in a global context, and they'll need to navigate US federal and state trends against a backdrop of this potential reputational or operational risks associated with diverging from global ESG trends, which seem to be more positive. So
Yeah.
Looking forward to your questions at the end, but
Thank you so much. That was a really comprehensive overview. So thank you for that. And you mentioned so much, but you mentioned something about strategic messaging, and that's from the individuals and the practitioners that I'm talking to, how are you dealing with it? And they're, it's looking at the messaging and trying to understand, do we have the right messaging? Are we, a lot are still dedicated to doing this. But Francine, you're in these shoes now. So how are you navigating all of this? Are you, are you getting a little whiplash because you are covering so many different responsibility areas as well?
Yeah, well, there's actually consistent themes across all three, whether it's philanthropy or sustainability or inclusive procurement. And in many ways, the different rooms are reinforcing the fact that these are all part of an ecosystem. I'll say that I think, to level set, working for a company and doing corporate impact for a company is very different from working from within a nonprofit, for instance, or from within a political advocacy organization. And so just to ground the context, I'm a practitioner that's working from within a company. We always have to monitor the legal landscape and abide by those rules. The challenge at the moment is that there are many different conflicts, right? And which rules are we then beholden to in which ways? Just to give you an example, this year in 2025 is the first year in which many multinationals will have to abide by what's called CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which really it's a comprehensive law that's really focused. It comes out of the European Green Deal, but it focuses on really a spectrum of sustainability topics, from climate change, biodiversity, working conditions, human rights, business ethics. So you can have a large multinational that is compelled to follow CSRD. So 2025 reporting on 2024 data. Next year, we'll have to report Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions in California, because if you do, I'm guessing most multinationals have some footprint in California, which is to report Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions on 2025 data in 2026. We may also have to comply with federal regulations. And so the issue right now, from a practitioner's perspective, is that, we are looking at myriad stakeholders. None are monolithic. Even if you think about the approach of servicing colleagues or employees within a company, half of the country voted one way, half voted another. And so how you frame the work that you're doing is really, and I'm going to borrow your language, Dr. LeBeau, it's about stronger strategic messaging. Many companies, I think right now, are really focused on their shared value approach. That's that intersection between whether it's profit and purpose. At Guardian, we call it our focus on doing good while creating value. And you're going to be seeing a lot of stronger articulation about how investments in community, investments in sustainability, investments in inclusive procurement even really support business priorities. So what will come from this, I think, is that many companies will have to articulate a stronger, clearer WIFM, what's in it for me, right? Will need to be more aligned with business priorities. Will absolutely have to understand and navigate the complexity and increasingly more complex regulatory environment. You have states, for instance, that are fundraising to oppose anticipated federal legislation and creating war chests. I think California may have $60 million right now in a war chest to protect the progressive laws that they've put in place. That's just an example. So practitioners like myself, we will be hewing very closely to our partners in the law department. We're also going to see, I think, a stronger shift away from activity metrics towards outcome metrics. And by that, I mean, it's not how many people you serve, right, in a program, but really, but for your investment, what change would not have occurred? And that kind of articulation, I think, is going to be demanded, because what is the result of your investment? I call it my but for, the but for question. And I'd say this kind of whiplash, to use your term, Erin, is not new, right? I was doing a quick search in preparing for this, and really since 2022, you've seen like just a large spate of laws and regulations. It's really been an acronym soup. But first there was a whiplash, there was a backlash to ESG, and then there was a backlash to the backlash. And now we are coming back around full circle. The truth is that it's been a roller coaster for a while. We will likely end up in a place where we have more moderation. Some, I think, will be incredibly sensible. For instance, for an organization of Guardian size, we are a Fortune 250. Next year, we are beholden to, it's called SB 219, Senate Bill 219 from California, and to reporting greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1 and scope 2, with what's called limited assurance. And we have to do that reporting with limited assurance on an annual basis. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars just to have that auditing standard. And so there are huge costs that are embedded in the system that I think, frankly, can be more modest. I would rather use that money to invest in community, rather invest in reporting. So there's some of those frictions in the system that I think need to be more common sense. And there are roles like mine that frankly will not be going away. I'll tell you that this push towards stronger strategic messaging is a huge echo in all of the different rooms. It's what is the work that I'm doing now? What are my current commitments versus what are my future commitments? And how do I articulate, how do I continue the work, and how do I get future commitments through the innovation funnel, if you would, using the current criteria? Whether it's responsible investing, whether it's climate risk, whether it's equity and inclusion, supplier diversity, inclusive procurement, I think you'll see a bit of relabeling of things. Dr. LeBeau, you mentioned that. You may see a bit of disaggregation of components of the work, but repackaged in different ways. The truth is that one of our core stakeholders is always going to be people who care about climate, whether they're investors or state governments, employees who do. But you'll also find more and more of the reports, some of my peers are reporting that potential clients are now asking questions like, what is your strategic philanthropy, and do you invest in a Planned Parenthood, or do you those are questions that wouldn't have come up in a regular course of a request for proposal, an RFP, but are coming up now. So it's just a bit of a new world, but to work in this field is to be able to pivot. And again, because we do it from the perspective of a corporation and businesses, we are always beholden to adherence to the regulatory requirement. It's just understanding what that is and being able to thread the needle.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think it goes back to Govi's being agile
Yes.
to the environment over and over again, and reinventing yourself. And to your point, we are seeing the relabeling, the different narratives. I mean, you go back to one of my favorite examples is Larry Fink and what he's done for ESG initially, but then how he's even had to rebrand it, right, to, I think, stakeholder capitalism, and he's got one or two other areas of words that he's calling because of the financial investments. And so maybe that can bridge to you, Mark, and start talking about the conversation. I mean, because as Francine just said, we need stronger metrics, right? We need that stronger business case. But the financial markets are a key role in this. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at, there's a really big body of research out there going back, many, many years. The initial research seemed to be heavily focused on, making a justification from a strategic standpoint to corporations, why you should be investing in these CSR efforts, right? The initial research for many, many years, I mean, there must be maybe even over 1,000 peer-reviewed, really, really well done papers out there that showed, relatively positive impacts, right, for doing this, right? So that was the initial. Everyone was like, okay, this is good. It's going to have a positive impact on the performance of the corporation. And then over time, the focuses started to shift. It's as a lot of people have been saying today, the shift from the stakeholder, it seems to be, shifting to the shareholder. Look, shareholders were always stakeholders, but now more than ever, shareholders seem to be, ruling the roost here. So from the beginning, my suspicion always was that there was a temporal aspect to all this, right? And so, whether it's social or not, whether it's the emergence of the, greed or whatever it is, you definitely see, I certainly have witnessed it in my research and also in my practice. I definitely have seen I have seen the focus shift back and forth. I wouldn't say it's just a pendulum, swings. We talked about the pendulum. There's definitely a pendulum, but, pendulum swings with I can understand where a pendulum's going to go, right? Because I can anticipate it's going to go left, it's going to go right. I can figure that out. But, in this case, there are other drivers, I think, that are happening here. I think that, markets behaving the way the markets are behaving, the amount of wealth that's been created over the last 5 years have, sort of, hardened the hearts of, what would have been stakeholders a few years ago, saying, hey, look, I'm going to invest in this company because they're doing good. It's more about, hey, can I get good returns from this company, right? So people are less concerned, unfortunately, investors from an investor standpoint. And I'm talking about individual investors, right? So I want to take a step back for a second and say that, from the perspective where I sit as an institutional investor, right? Of course, I'm always looking at, the returns of companies because that's my role. That's what I have to do. It's not easy for me to sit and justify to my stakeholders, that I've invested in a company that's not returning good returns just because I like their CSR efforts or something like that. But the good news is, and this is a lot of what my research is about, is that it does, good companies perform well, right? Companies that do good perform well, right? That this is a well-known thing, right? Maybe in our little community, we understand that in academia, but I know it for a fact, right? So even when we're assessing whether to invest in a company, why would I ever invest my money in a company that is irresponsible with their environmental practices? Or why would I invest in a company that does not have does not practice diversity, meaning they're cutting whole, sectors out of, their potential hiring pool? Why would I do that? Why would I invest in a company that has, illegal child labor? Why would I do that stuff, right? So without any of the, the social pressure or anything like that, for us, from my perspective, what I've learned as I've gotten the mandate to start monitoring and then ultimately setting limits on what I was investing in, I find it to be beneficial, right? And so from my perspective, we are always going to be looking at those ESG metrics and things like that. So that sort of really informed the research that I do in my academic life, trying to sort of prove that that there is a temporal aspect to things and that they change, but they don't only get worse, they get better as well, right? And
Well, you're
so
addressing
I'm
risk too,
I'm
right?
sorry. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly right. It has to do a lot to do with risk. So, during times of market strife, we would anticipate that the interest of investors would be to invest in companies that have higher ESG scores, right? Because they're lower risk. And we also know there's a lot of research out there that shows us that companies that score well in ESG have easier access to financing, cheaper financing, right? This all makes sense because ESG is a really good risk assessment of how well a company can do. And so, I'm pretty sure that we are unfortunately in one of those troughs at this point. But if things change for the worst, I suspect a different market regime would sort of shift again the focus back to more focusing on companies will be able to focus again on doing good, right? And so it's all about, for me, it's all about quantification here, and that's what my research is all about. To close, because I could talk forever on this. I just want to speed it up and just say, look, at the end of the day, my research, and I've been doing it for several years now, has evolved. It's interesting that I'm doing this research over this crazy period where all this industry is right now in a tumult. I've witnessed the changes, but I'm not surprised to see those changes, which means there is probably some causality, right? And so I've backed out my research to focus really on just the portfolio management aspect of it. And I'm pretty confident that I'll be able to, at the end of the day, prove some very interesting things, which should be positive for everybody here, who is on this call, because at the end of the day, again, whether, no matter what 3-letter mnemonic you use, to describe this, doing good always going back forever in the investment community, always equal doing well, right? And so it's just about quantifying it. It's about evolving how we look at things. We talked about, earlier before before we all started about, this industry has had some training wheels because it's had a little bit of let's call it government backing, so to speak. And now the training wheels are off, right? So now, we have to sort of evolve with that, but I'm confident that we will because the numbers are there. And so you can also see the research in the field also from academics is also shifting. We're definitely seeing more, negatively focused hypotheses out there. But the reality is that, there is certainly causality that we can prove here. And so there's going to be a continued interest, certainly from the investment community, whether we talk about it or we don't talk about it, we still look at these ESG ratings. I mean, I'm looking at every ESG rating that we're very, very, very closely involved in that. Any of our investment decisions, that has always been a top 5 because we know that it's a big risk factor that we can mitigate. And so, I will respectfully pass along the mic. If anybody is interested in talking more about this, who's out there, please reach out. I could talk forever. One of my cohort mates is out there, and I'm sure she's shaking her head right now because she knows we could talk forever about this. But I will respectfully pass the mic along.
Well, thank you, Mark. And look, we need more of you, right? More purpose-driven people carrying these torches. And it's truly, what's keeping this whole movement alive, if you will. But you've talked about how we need to evolve. And Ben, I'd like to go to you. In some of our prep calls, you've talked about how the need to evolve within your career. How you need to differentiate yourself, right? So when we look at this and we take all of this and we think about careers and we think about working for global companies, give us a little bit of light on your perspectives, from somebody who started as a bench chemist who is now, driving the sustainability at a huge global company.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I think that's an interesting perspective, because when I started in R&D doing bench chemistry work in the coatings industry, sustainability, I'm just wondering if we even use that word, right? So we had different drivers. We had regulatory drivers. We also had consumer drivers to make these things in the way that that we wanted to. So I think what has happened is, my career has moved on from the bench chemist along, and now all of a sudden, like 6-7 years ago, all of a sudden sustainability kind of became the thing, right? When you hear about people talking, senior managers, every fifth word is now sustainability, or has been for the last few years. And you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt, because some of us have been kind of in it and doing it, and there's an innovation aspect of it too. Technology advances, we learn, we get to know more, we understand better, and we kind of evolve. And I don't want to harp on the time frame, but sometimes we get stuck in a very short time frame, but things move on, and we do evolve in that. So I think just thinking about that, perhaps for some of those that are on the call, there's a technical aspect to sustainability, right? We talk about the environment. It's a heavily science focused topic. So you really have to kind of be able to bite into that and really get down to the facts. And I like what Mark said about making numbers tell the story you want, right? So I'm a little skeptical sometimes of numbers. So you have to sometimes look beyond just the numbers, because sometimes the numbers can be presented one way, and there are multiple interpretations. So I think it takes a little bit of a holistic approach to that. Know the facts, know the numbers, know the science behind it, and then also, bring in that business end of it. So that's where I sort of always been. So I know we've got others here on the policy end of it. So with the businesses, and I'll kind of bring it back to the consumers, shareholders, stakeholders have been tossed around on the panel and during our discussion today. As consumers, we vote, with our wallets, right? So, when you're thinking about choices, what to buy, from who to buy, I try to think about that, and I try to kind of pass that along to those in my circle. Vote with your wallet. If something is important to you, and you feel the value of a company, and Mark mentioned that good companies do well. I mean, there are brands out there around that. They built a very successful brand, and we as consumers, or many consumers, gravitate to that. And I think that's sort of that business driver. So sustainability and innovation can lead to value. There is value sort of irrespective of the regulatory landscape. I think we have to comply, right? There are regulations, and that has to be in place, but that doesn't have to be the sole driver. So I think, agility has been used a lot. I think that's an important one. So as my career has progressed, and as I think everybody's career has progressed, we have to kind of be ready for change, and that change is happening faster. We have to adapt, and change is I don't know, the new constant, or has always been that way, but things are evolving much quicker. And now, AI was brought up, Copilot was brought up. These are all tools that we now have at our disposal. Data becomes such an important aspect of what we do. So, you know, the access or the data that I had access to as a bench chemist was so much more limited compared to what we have now. We can access, you know, they're called data lakes now, where you have tons and tons of information, and to be able to process that. So, you know, that's another thing to keep in mind as sustainability evolves. I think it's always been data driven. It's just going to be even more data driven moving forward. So,
Hey,
Yeah.
Ben, I just want to comment on it. One question, Aaron, just a comment on what Ben was talking about. In talking about science and technology as the root, the predecessor of the sustainability movement in the chemical industry was called responsible care. For those of you who remember, and little misinformation. It was always data, data, data. American Chemistry Council did work around the world. So following Bhopal, for those of you who remember, the chemical industry turned on its time and made safety and responsibility a key aspect of every company worldwide, doesn't matter where you are. And it was fundamentally driven by data, science, and technology, and no misinformation. And one of the disadvantages today is people make interpretation of 18 characters on a tweet and actually make decisions based on that, when all you could do is pick up the phone or look at the data and get it and start a conversation. So that's one of the reasons why AI kind of helping us and taking out the bias in it is going to be huge, but driving ethics in that is going to be significant. We're facing that today, correcting misinformation all the time. It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, and that's going to be a big task for every one of us to reach out. And even the concept of science and technology has become woke. You know, if you talk about education and science, and there are people throwing things in our faces in terms of, you know, homeschooling and not going to schools and, you know, distrusting or mistrusting the system, and how do we battle this? So I think we have to be on all fronts across the board, reaching out across the board. So good point, Ben. I appreciate you bringing that up as well. But I mean, we've survived this, and I think we'll have to build on those things as we talk through change at the next level.
I think you're right. I think it, you know, in a way, we've done it before, we'll do it again, but it also gets harder as the technology and the innovation, you know, advances, and hence the misinformation, excuse me. But we keep talking about like innovation, right? This is what we need to do. We need to innovate. And Sam, if I can move to you, because you're in that forefront of innovation with upskilling and the future of work, and especially when it comes around to these topics. What kind of infrastructure are you building, and what are you seeing as well from your clients, given the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for us, you know, at One Huddle, we have an interesting window into what organizations, you know, are actually doing versus maybe what they say they're doing. You know, we work with organizations, specifically the human resource groups, operational teams, DEI groups, who are thinking about what content they're creating, who's getting access to it, and it's been interesting to observe by industry, whether you're thinking about the hospitality category, who traditionally underinvests in back of house workers and overinvests in leadership roles, or looking at healthcare, who again, very similar, big investment in skilled trade workers, but not investing in certain frontline roles. So we've had an interesting, you know, vantage point into it. I mean, I think that from our position, we've observed that building skills is a major challenge for organizations today. Probably not a surprise to most folks here. You know, we live in an environment today where 1 in 2 jobs are bad jobs, according to the Brookings Institute. That means a $400 parking ticket, which is real here in New Jersey. That could put you into poverty. 80% of jobs are in the service sector. And according to the OECD, you know, we're ranked second to last in investment in workforce development, and have been that way for a very long time. It's less than 0.1% of our GDP, and we call ourselves a skill building nation. So, you know, I think that when we double click and we think about this topic of ESG and sustainability, you know, I think that we got to talk about the human capital groups within a variety of communities that affect our workforce. And I think it starts with it's got to start with this vantage point that, and we talk about this a lot with brands, that we don't have unskilled workers. Like, we have unwilling leaders, and wherever that framing of unskilled exists probably needs to be rethought. And the challenge revolves around kind of three prongs: underinvestment. Organizations, 91% of corporate training and workforce tools are still manuals. I just talked to a brand today that uses flashcards for their corporate training infrastructure. So when they open a new hotel, somebody has to print the flashcards and put them in it's again, 91% of investment is in not using innovation and technology. It's also under-resourced, and this speaks to the human resource group as a whole. That first in, first out accounting course we all took. Like, HR is like first, they're like, it's almost like they're first out, last back in. And coming out of COVID, the human resource functions were so shrunken down that the ability to bring those groups back, the scars are still there today. And I think the third prong, like I said, we're underinvesting, we're under-resourced, is I think that in certain organizations, there's a lack of interest in who does get access to information. Because the topics we're talking about, whether it's a focus on environmental roles or focus on social jobs, human capital, governance, regardless of the topic area here, we live in an environment where, according to Peter Capelli at UPenn, who's written a bunch of books on the workforce topics, said 83 cents of every workforce dollar goes to the top of an organization, and it never quite trickles down to the people who deserve it most in our workforce. And that's a real problem from an innovation perspective, because the folks on the front lines affect the bottom line. And the fact that we have an environment with so many workers on the front line who are going to have to reskill, as was brought up by Govi earlier today, and talked about how, I think the quote was, adapting and staying flexible for continuous learning is of critical importance, as jobs shift and the skills necessary for those jobs are going to change dramatically. This is an area where innovation can play a major role. And, a few suggestions, tactical suggestions to throw out there. And I think it depends. We have a lot of people on the call, government folks, education, private sector. If you're in government, there's a lot of labor laws that were written at a time before this, we even had internet, and they are still holding workers back. And they were written, the Fair Labor Standard Act is a powerful piece of legislation, was written a very long time ago to create a variety of benefits and positive impacts on workers. Today, it creates an environment where certain workers are not even able to voluntarily access skilled training. Government has an opportunity to fix certain regulations to create more opportunity for education providers in the room around innovation. Private sector companies need access, and individuals need access to what jobs and what career pathways are the future of work. And in a lot of organizations, I'm constantly surprised at how many folks in the HCM role, or even frontline managers, are not necessarily aware of career pathway opportunities. I think there's a huge opportunity for colleges, universities, all the way up and down the ladder to do a better job there and use innovation as the way to communicate information. Private sector companies, they need to move past compliance as being the primary investment when it comes to skill building. I love food safety training. I think it's great for restaurant workers, but that can't be the only thing we're doing every day with workers. There's a huge opportunity given what AI is doing for content creation. Now, again, needs to be checked. There's a variety, but how about this? At One Huddle, we launched an AI game creation tool in Q4 of last year that allows a company to take all of their content, plug it in, it auto generates different skill series for them. We had a 800% increase in courses created in Q1. So again, opportunity to more rapidly convert best practice into content and use innovation to reach people where they are. And I think the last thing for me is for the HR buyers that are in the room, the folks that are sitting around that are thinking about what they're purchasing. Meeting workers where they are is a huge opportunity today. But again, we live in an environment where what a worker does before they clock in and after they clock out is highly regulated. And even if a worker voluntarily wants to skill themselves up for the next job, there's restrictions on how they do that. And I think there's, there's a lack of in some cases, willingness or nervousness around what happens if a worker's using this, which is pretty wild to think about. What happens if a worker uses this to skill themselves up? What type of exposure does the business have if they were attempting to help workers? And so I think that there's some stuff there. And I guess last, and then I'll kick it back. Individuals out there, the students that are here, like my one piece of advice from an innovation perspective is like to demand more. Because there's a lot of power that exists in frontline in order to change the landscape of their access to skills and their access to career opportunities, especially in this category. So back to you, Erin.
Thanks, Sam. And I think that's a good reminder too. And this is something that I always tell my students when I teach is keep in mind that these companies need you just as much as you want a job, right? And so you are a key stakeholder to these organizations as much as consumers are. And we talked about where to put our money, right? Vote with your wallet. Stakeholders include employees, and employees, maybe not everyone has the luxury of leaving an organization, but you are in a position of being vocal at your organization or where you apply and so forth. And so I think evaluating companies from that perspective is really important as well. So I know we are very much over our time, and I think we could probably continue to talk for another hour. I do just want to see there is a couple questions here in the panel. One that is asking about green hushing, which I find this, I feel like we always find these buzzwords, right? It's purpose washing and greenwashing, and now we're hushing. But I understand that the question is, right, are people going to continue to be silent on what they're doing because they're worried about the backlash from the administration? This one specifically to the financial sector, but I think it could go across anybody. So any thoughts?
I'll say in response to that, I'm not hearing from many of my peers that they will be rolling back much of the money that's invested in the work or the initiatives. People may be relabeling things, but the truth is that there are key stakeholders, which are investors that are demanding, for instance, access to green bonds, which are employees who want affinity networks, whether you call them belonging or ERGs or BRG. I think it was you, Ben, who talked about the cyclicality of this work, recognizing that you may be at a trough or a peak, depending on your take. It may just be smart to continue the work, whatever the name, and drive progress forward. No one wants to be hindered by bureaucracy, whether it comes from federal or state or pick a group. And I think you may be seeing a period of pragmatism, but continued investment. In fact, I'm even hearing people are saying that they are investing more. There are new roles, like ESG controller is a role that has come up a lot. And while it's tied to regulatory, there still needs to be inclusion and equity roles. There still needs to be strategic philanthropy. There still needs to be vendor diversity. As long as someone is asking for it, and many someones are, including many of you on the call. I don't really care what you call it.
I think that's a powerful, yep, well said. Well said. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add, I completely agree with Francine. Definitely well said. I also heard a quote from the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU, their NYU School of Law, and they stated that it was really a mixture of companies withdrawing from DEI and those continuing their program. So I think we're going to see a mix. And the quote was, "No matter what happens in the field of DEI as it is presently constituted and branded, the underlying work will endure."
Absolutely. All
Yeah.
right.
Absolutely. So with that, I just want to thank each and every one of you. This was a phenomenal discussion. Again, I think it's something we could talk for another hour, maybe even two. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And this is just a reminder to all of you on the panel and everyone else about the type of work that the organizations that we have here and others are doing to really drive this work forward with corporate social innovation. Please take a look and submit for applications for the award ceremony that we have coming up, and share with your colleagues inside and outside of your organizations too. So thank you so much. Gina, I think we're ready to
Yes.
turn it back over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, the panel. You were fabulous. I really appreciate it. I know we're a little over. Deb's going to just pull up 2 slides to close, which have QR codes. So the first one is what I talked about earlier, which is we're looking for nominations for our recognition event. And as I mentioned, 3 of the people who submit by noon tomorrow, it's not a whole long nomination. You have to know everything about it. It's just saying, I think that Sam Cauchy is fabulous, and let's nominate him for the work he's doing at One Huddle, which actually I think we will be doing. So that's that. And then on the next slide, so I'll give a second for everybody to get that QR code again. And then on the next slide, we have 2 very short surveys. One is if you are a student, please look at the QR code on the left and you will see questions. Just take you a couple of minutes that are really going to inform how we will continue to support you in our programming and our research. And on the right, we have professionals survey. And this will also inform our support, our programming, our research efforts. They're very short surveys, just a few questions. So please fill that out, and we're going to use it for our data quantification and research going forward. And with that, on the last slide, I want to thank everyone for participating. I thought this was an amazing session, and we're really grateful to all of our speakers and all of our participants. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gina. Thanks, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Great session.
Thank you. We'll send out the slides tomorrow along with some other handouts and other related material.
Thank you, everybody.